What are the arguments against protective trade policy, or what are the cases against protective trade policy or protectionism? Is the protectionism free from the demerits? Certainly not. Let's look into the details. Restrictive trade policy or protectionism is argued to be anti-production policy or anti-consumption policy. A restrictive trade policy is considered to be anti-production policy, as the nations cannot specialize on the commodities on which they have the comparative advantage. That means they are not able to specialize on the commodities on which they have the comparative advantage. That means the production cannot be maximized. They have to diversify the industry, as the markets are closed, but the production will not be maximized as there is no specialization. Similarly, consumption is also not going to be maximized under a restrictive trade policy, as the consumers don't have the wide variety of commodities. They have to purchase whatever is produced domestically. No commodities will be available from the foreign market, as the market is closed, as there are so many restrictions in place for the import and export of commodities. So the restrictive trade policy is argued to be anti-consumption policy as well. Second case against restrictive trade policy or protectionism is commodities are at higher prices. Commodities will be available only at higher prices, as the tariff imposition leads to increase in prices. Suppose 100% is the tariff, then 100% hike will be there in the price of the commodity on which tariff is imposed. In that case, the domestic consumers are compelled to purchase the commodities produced domestically. So the commodities will be available only at higher price. This is the another demerit of protectionism. Third demerit of protective trade policy is domestic companies cannot access the foreign markets, as there is high restrictions in place from the part of the domestic government as well as the foreign governments. So as the restrictive trade policy is in place all across the globe, the domestic firms cannot export. They cannot access the foreign markets, as the restrictions are in place. Restrictive trade policy is characterized by the existence of trade wars and poor bilateral relations. Nations follow retaliatory trade restrictive measures. Under retaliatory and under restrictive trade policy, whenever a nation imposes tariff and other non-tariff barriers on the commodities import, then the opposite nation will retaliate by imposing tariff and non-tariff barriers on the import of commodities from their rival nation. So this rivalry in terms of trade is called the trade war. The most recent example for us is US-China trade war, as initially United States imposed tariff on the commodities import from China, and in retaliation China increased the tariff on the import of commodities from the United States to China. This is US-China trade war. So this trade war is highly existing in the restrictive trade practices, and the bilateral relations will become poor as well with trade war, just as the US-China trade relation, US-China political relation is not in good shape. This is in fact in that case, this is in fact against the peace and tranquility of the world. That means for the better relations, for the better bilateral relations, the free trade policy is highly required. Restrictive trade policy is argued to be politically motivated policy, as the tariff restrictions and non-tariff restrictions will be imposed by the politicians, by the statesmen, so the decisions can be taken by the politicians in power. So this is a politically motivated policy, unlike the free trade policy. Under a free trade policy is 100% free from political unwanted interferences. So what we need to expect from trade is the economic efficiency or production efficiency. So what we lack in the restrictive trade policy is in fact economic efficiency or production efficiency. Economic efficiency or production efficiency cannot be expected under a restrictive trade policy. This is economic efficiency. The prevalence of economic efficiency is in fact the outcome or outcome of the free trade policy. Under restrictive trade policy, the production will be taking place at the higher cost. As there is no competition, as competition is hardly possible among the nations, so the domestic firms, inefficient firms, don't want to face any competition from the foreign companies. So the inefficient industry remain inefficient, inefficient companies remain inefficient. So the economic efficiency will be lacking under restrictive trade policy. So these are the some of the major demerits or cases against the restrictive trade policy or the protectionism.